And amoeba is the main critter. And there's a lot of different species of amoeba. They have something called a pseudophodia. So pseudo is like false, fake, and podia means like foot. Okay, so some lack a cell wall. So basically these are like their fake feet right here, and they kind of like move forward using that, you know, the way they move that way. Endo would be inside. Ecto is like outside. I'm just trying to help you with some of these. Vago, that has to do with eating. Just trying to do ones that I remember. It might help you. And then a test is basically a protective structure secreted by the cytoplasm. So it's just like a little, kind of a more heavy-duty cell wall or cell membrane. And then now we can talk about the fungi. My husband likes to make the joke that he's a fungi. So some basic characteristics about these guys. They're heterotrophic, right? Which means they don't make their own food. Hetero means like different. So their food is not like they don't make their own food. Then there's saprophytic, which are decomposers. So they can be decomposers, they can be parasites, they can be symbiotic, or they can even be predators, which is kind of cool. Because mostly you think of them as kind of plant-like, which is we'll talk about in a second. But basically, they're more closely related to animals than plants, which is kind of mind-boggling because they don't really look too animal-like. Chitin is their cell walls are made of chitin, and that's what's interesting is it's also an insect exoskeleton. Exo means outside. And then they also have glycogen, which is like a storage carbohydrate, which is interesting because that's also an animal. So again, we've got these animal-y things going on with this thing that doesn't look so animal-y, which is kind of interesting. Maybe hearing my cat in the background. They don't really get along. So how do these guys reproduce? So they can reproduce sexually, and they can bud or they can fragment. So budding is, you know, kind of that daughter cell comes off, or they can fragment. They can just kind of break apart and then are two new organisms. They can also be asexual, and they can have spores, and their spores can be either sexual or asexual, which is kind of interesting. The spore is basically, oh my gosh, the cats. The spore is basically just like a kind of like a little seed kind of thing, and it's just really sturdy, and it can withstand really not very pleasant environments. So basically, this is kind of how they can reproduce, how fungus can reproduce. So they have these spores. You can see sometimes, maybe if you like kick a fungus over, it has like this, right? Those are basically spores. So they can be released. They can attach on critters, or they can be spread by wind or water, and then they'll spread all over the ground, and then they can kind of go underground, and then they'll grow and make little mushrooms. So that's kind of basically how they work. So these are the main group of fungi. We have the chytrids, and these are the oldest group of fungi. They are predominantly aquatic, so they live in the water mostly. Their gametes are flagellated, which means they have little tails, and they have that chitin for the cell wall, which remember is that stuff that's in insect exoskeletons. Okay, and then we have Zygomycetes, This includes bread mold, and they are saprobes or parasites, which a saprobe means that they're decomposers. And they're usually asexual. And they have something called a zygospore, which is these little black pieces here. And they're basically, they just remain dormant until there are favorable environmental conditions. Then we have Ascomycetes. This is where most of the known fungi live. That's where they're classified. They're known as sac fungi. Some ferment and some parasitize, and they're mostly asexual. Like I said, I'm just doing like the brief overview of these different groups. I'm not like, if you want the real details, you can go into the content, right? I'm just doing an overview tonight. The Basidiomycetes, these are club fungi, and the clubs are known as Basidia, and gill fungi. So if you turn a fungus over, and you see, you turn a mushroom over and it has these like lines, right, like this. We call those the gills. And most of the edible fungi are in this group, so you might see this in those like white mushrooms that you get at the store, or like portobello mushrooms, you would see the gills. And this is interesting. This is like an angel ring is what they call it, or fairy ring, something like that. And basically there's like they kind of grow, like they deplete the nutrients. And so from like the center area, and so they grow like in a circle around where they've like depleted the nutrients, which is kind of interesting. Like they can't grow in the middle because there's no nutrients left.